Hello, and thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to Is This a Good Idea? Now, fair warning, this talk is a bit of an ADHD side quest, and it came about as a result of me coming up with just a wild thing to try, and then I went through some rabbit holes, so there we go. My name is Adriana Villela. I'm originally from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I live in Toronto, Canada. I am a CNCF ambassador. I'm also a serial blogger, podcaster, and I'm also a maintainer of the Hotel End User SIG and an Hotel Community Manager. My day job, as Andy mentioned, is as a principal developer advocate at Dynatrace, where I live and breathe observability and open telemetry. I also like to climb walls, and I love capybaras because they make me happy. Now, this talk isn't about open telemetry, but it will touch upon a little open telemetry reference. So, fun fact, I am a proud Gen Xer. I was born in 1979, and I first started coding when I was 10. My first language was BASIC, and for those who have heard of it, anyone? Right on. Awesome. Yeah, so I was coding in BASIC on a machine that ran both DOS and Windows 3.1, you know, had those old-fashioned 3.5-inch floppy disks. You know, I have gone through all sorts of changes. When I was born, records were still being used. I went through cassette tapes, DVDs, CDs, Blu-ray, streaming. Text messaging was not a thing when I was growing up because cell phones weren't a thing when I was growing up. And when text messaging finally became a thing, it was through the numeric keypad on the phone. So we didn't have those nice little keyboards either. You know, I've seen it. MSN Instant Messenger, ICQ. Does anyone remember ICQ? I'm definitely dating myself here. And of course, AOL Instant Messenger. Now, all this to say that folks who are Gen Z, and I would say even millennial, are at a unique vantage point because we have seen a lot of change. It's pretty much built into our DNA. And so I feel like we are quite suited for careers in tech, which is why I myself ended up in tech. Now, my first job out of university was as a software developer. I was a Java developer for 16 years, and I hail from the age of J2EE and EJBs and BEA WebLogic and all that stuff. And when I was developing, and when I was a developer, you know, life was a lot simpler, right? There were fewer things that we had to worry about. It was the age of monoliths. Google itself was just a few years old, and cloud wasn't really a thing. And now we fast forward to today, and software development has evolved a fair bit, and developers are expected to not only know how to develop, but they have to keep all this extra knowledge in their brains. And I don't know about you, but as a developer, I don't want to think about these things. I want to be able to, you know, not worry about how to do bash scripting. Yeah, I want to look it up because I can never remember how to do loops or if statements in bash. Regex, I don't care. Like, it looks like garble to me. Please just tell me how to do something in regex. Complex git commands, sure. The easy stuff, you know, the day-to-day workflow where we're doing git push and git commit, no problem. But as soon as you start getting into like cherry picking and rebasing, I have to look that up. And of course, those nasty stack traces, you know, as a Java developer, null pointer exception, yeah, I got that. But anything where, you know, you got some stack trace with some error message that you had never seen before, I want to just be able to look it up, right? And, you know, we had Stack Overflow and all this nice stuff to help us. And in the before times, I used to even keep a text pad document that I would carry around with me from job to job so that I could refer to those lovely things that I forgot or didn't want to care about remembering. And then I got smart and I'm like, hey, I'm going to put my stuff in a private GitHub repo where I can reference all these things that are that I don't want to remember. But that gets a little bit annoying too because, you know, after a while, like, I don't know, I could never find stuff, and I ended up duplicating information. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if I could just ask? have someone think for us. And of course, we do have someone to think for us. We have our lovely chatbots, right, where I can say, hey, I want a regular expression that does blah, and it spits out a regular expression for me, which is amazing. Now, in early days of chatbots, like back in 2022, we had these nice little things that were available to us where we could ask, how do you generate me a regex that does blah? Or like I used to use AI to draw a lot of images for my slides, so I'd get it to draw pictures of capybaras with superhero capes, and that's all well and good. But the LLMs were really limited by what the data that they were being trained on. And then all of a sudden, we're like, hey, we want to make things a lot easier. So all of a sudden, MCP came about, and it opened up this whole new wide world to us, right? All of a sudden, the internet became available to our LLMs through MCP servers, because now it's basically an API for LLMs to access services. So any kind of service that you have available, if you want to make it available to your LLMs, MCP, and voila, which is awesome. And then we were like, hey, we need something better. Let's give us more. And then agents came about, right? And this is around the time that I encountered this thing called Goose, and it was quite by accident. I was on Blue Sky, and I saw this post by Angie Jones, who worked at Block, and she's like, oh, I got Goose to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, ooh, this looks really cool. I want to check it out. And what is Goose? Well, it is nothing more than just an agentic framework, which is awesome, and it does some nice abstractions for us as well. Before we had our MCP world, where we had our MCP client server service and our underlying LLM, and then Goose, it's an abstraction layer where you can basically plug in your favorite provider, so it can be Copilot, it can be Claude, plug in your favorite LLM, etc. Right? And you might be thinking, cool, but there's a bunch of other tools that do the exact same thing, and you are totally right. But the thing that caught my attention with Goose was that basically it's free and open source, and who doesn't love free and open source? It runs locally on your machine, which is also very nice. I'm a bit of a control freak, so I kind of like that. And as I said, you can plug in your favorite provider, LLM, MCP servers, and this is very nice, but also it's a little bit of a buyer beware, because yes, Goose is free, but these LLMs, access to these LLMs might not be free, and even if you're running a model locally on your machine, you are incurring some sort of cost, so it's free-ish, right? And then the thing that I really liked about Goose was that it had this concept of reusable workflows through recipes and sub-recipes, which is basically just agents and sub-agents. So then I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool, putting on my developer hat, wouldn't it be cool if I could create reusable prompt-based workflows? And so I set about using Goose to do just that. So basically, I wanted to create a workflow where I stood up a Kubernetes cluster and installed Argo CD, all through prompts, right? So natural language. And then I would want Argo CD to manage the deployment of the OTel demo, but I wanted to use the OTel operator, which Casper had introduced. And the OTel operator, to run the OTel operator, you have to install Cert Manager. So Argo CD would manage the installation and deployment of all these things. And then I work at Dynatrace, so I'm sending my OTel data to Dynatrace, but you can send it to wherever you want. And Dynatrace has an MCP server, which allows me to query my OTel data using natural language. So the whole point of this is to use natural language to create reusable prompt-based workflows, which is awesome. And so my plan was as follows. I would install Goose in a dev container because, again, control freak, I want to limit my blast radius. My MCP client would be GitHub Copilot, because that's what I had available through work. My LLM would be GPT-4o. Don't judge. I'll get into that sooner, a little bit later. And then I wanted wanted to run the following MCP servers. Goose has this thing called a developer extension, which is basically fancy word for MCP server that has access to your command line and common commands like curl, etc. Right? And then Argo CD has an MCP server, so I thought, hey, cool, I can use the Argo CD MCP server to manage deployment of all those things in my Kubernetes cluster. And then, as I mentioned, Dynatrace has an MCP server, so then I wanted to query the OTel data using natural language. Cool. And so this is the agentic workflow with Goose. Sorry, it's a little bit tiny. But basically, this is just a summary of what I was going to do. So the darker rectangles represent the agents, and then the lighter rectangles represent the sub-agents. And you can think of it as, you know, if you've used Ansible, it's like an Ansible playbook, but written in natural language, because it's a similar sort of idea. It's got you can parameterize things, you can run subtasks or sub-recipes, you can you specify your output format, so all this awesome stuff. But was this actually a good idea? Or was this a problem looking for a solution? Because I realized, you know, I actually set about creating this little demo last September, and I thought, this is so cool. I'm gonna like play with AI. It's gonna be awesome. And I thought my biggest challenge was going to be to get Goose running in a dev container, because anytime I try to do anything with dev containers, it always blows up in my face. And using it with Microsoft GitHub Copilot was also extremely challenging. So I thought, okay, if I can solve this, then the rest is going to be really easy. But it turns out that it was not. And in fact, I found that the prompt writing experience was like one of the most depressing experiences of my life as a developer. As a developer, I get a natural high from like solving problems, right? As many of us do. And this was the opposite of that. I realized that prompt writing is hard. You know, I was expecting it to be like in Star Trek, where Geordi would be like, hey, computer, run a level 10 diagnostic, and the computer would be like, yeah, no problem, it would do it. But instead, it felt more like Scotty in Star Trek 4 going, hello, computer, yelling into the mouse, and the mouse ain't doing anything. It's like, what do you want me to do? That's what it felt like. So for example, this is a prompt that I thought was a beautiful prompt used to generate a token so that I could use it, an Argo CD token specifically, so I could actually use the Argo CD MCP server. I was going a little bit meta. And so I ran this thing a bunch of times. 9 times I ran it, and I got this lovely result. And it's like, yes, these are the steps I'm going to take, and this is all the stuff that I'm doing. I'm like, bravo, LLM, this is amazing work. And then all of a sudden, on the 10th iteration, it decided to ignore me. And instead, it came out and said, yes, these are the steps I'm going to take. Would you like me to execute them? I'm like, dude, I thought we had an understanding. Were we not running this thing the first 9 times perfectly? And all of a sudden, you decide to change your mind on me. And all of a sudden, I felt like Captain Picard in the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Chain of Command, where he is captured by the Cardassians, and they're trying to convince them that there are 5 lights in the room where he's being captured, and he is desperately telling them, no, I see 4 lights, and that is the truth. And that's what I felt like. I felt like I was yelling at my LLM saying, no, there are 4 lights. Stop ignoring me, buddy. So yes, that caused me a lot of depression. And then I got to thinking, yeah, there's definitely some, you know, that was my big realization of LLMs are non-deterministic. And so we can't expect to have, you know, these consistent results. But I also did a little bit of inner reflection, a little bit of Googling, a little bit of chatting with my favorite chatbot. And I realized that I'm actually a terrible prompt writer. And so I set about to educate myself on writing better prompts. And so I realized a few things. First of all, context is queen. You know, the LLM is kind of like a junior developer who's afraid to talk to you, which I've been there. I was a junior developer who was afraid to talk to my seniors. And you give it instructions, and if you're not specific enough, it'll just fill in the blanks. Just like the junior developer, they're too afraid to talk to you, so then they'll be like, I'll just make some assumptions, it'll be fine. So you need to make sure that you say, okay, what is the objective? What is your role? What are you, what are the inputs? What are some references, reference code, reference documentation? What are your outputs? What do you expect as your output format? You have to include all these things, otherwise the LLM's just gonna guess. It can't read your mind. Markdown is magic. I was writing everything in paragraphs and I was like, pretty please do this. And it's like, no, let's get down to business. I like bullet points. Turns out that LLMs also like bullet points. So it's a lot easier to parse. Then I discovered this thing called temperature. Which I learned is a number between 0 and 1, although it can be higher than 1, where it basically specifies how much leeway does your LLM have in terms of interpreting your instructions, where 0 is, you follow my instructions to the T, and 1 is, have at it, get creative. I don't want to ever give it 1, I give it a 0.5, and Goose does have support for this, not at least initially when I was playing around with this stuff, like Copilot didn't have support for temperature, but this is a very useful setting. And then finally, instruction files, global instruction files for your project make a huge difference, because if you find yourself repeating yourself a bunch of times for the same prompt, put in an instructions file. It's like coding, right? We abstract away the common elements into like a function. So this is like a global set of functions that it reads before it executes your prompt. So awesome. But then I learned, and so here's an example of a prompt. This is actually a Goose recipe file, and you can see it kind of reminds you a bit of an Ansible playbook. And you can see that I was using paragraphs to give my instructions and my prompts to the LLM, which was terrible. And then after my LLM, my prompt writing awakening, this became a lot better. I used Markdown, I used bullet points. So I was trying to follow the same things that I had learned in my research. Now, that's only part of the problem. The other thing I learned is that not all LLMs are created equal. This was a rude awakening, and remember when I said I initially was using GPT-4o, and when I was mentioning this project to a few people, they're like, GPT-4o, why are you using that? That's a piece of crap. And I'm like, what? It makes a difference. And then I decided to like try out Claude Sonnet one time, and I'm like, holy crap, this thing's way better than GPT-4o. So yeah, not all LLMs are created equal, but also they are a representation of their input data and biases, which means that yes, the better the training for the LLM, the better the LLM. And of course, the other thing that's important is that your mileage will vary. So I was like super excited. I was using Claude Sonnet for a bunch of my stuff, and then I ran out of premium tokens because it burns through 3 times more tokens compared to GPT-4o, which doesn't. It's a 0x versus a 3x for GitHub Copilot. So basically, I was rendered incapacitated after 2 hours of using Claude Sonnet. So then I found the happy medium using Claude Haiku, which is a little bit better. Not as good as Sonnet, but at least it won't burn through the tokens at as high a rate. The other thing that I learned is that it's important to know your MCP. And what do I mean by that? Well, I made some assumptions about the MCP servers that I wanted to use and their capabilities. And as they say, assume makes an ass of you and me. And credit to my friend Reese Lee. This is her cat Taco, who makes the most amazing slide model ever. I just love her cat, for real. So remember our original setup. I wanted to use these 3 MCP servers, and then I realized after using the Argo CD MCP server, it no bueno for me. It turned out that it didn't have the capabilities that I was looking for. I wanted something to really stand up my entire Argo CD to be able to configure it, so to register the repositories, create projects, to deploy to deploy applications, and at the time, and I checked a couple weeks ago, it still only has the capability of deploying applications. And I tried that and it wasn't working for me, so I'm like, scratch it. But I kept the other two MCP servers. So when choosing MCP servers, you want to keep the following in mind. First of all, identify which MCP servers you need, what are their capabilities, know what you're getting into. Make sure that they're trustworthy, because if you're running these things locally on your machines, and they're written by a third party, you don't know what kind of nasty stuff has been embedded in that code. And of course, if you're working for an organization, they will probably have some further restrictions on the types of MCP servers that you are allowed to run on your machine. So beware. But so what? Okay, learned all these cool things, but was this even a good idea? But seriously, was it? And it's not just a question of like whether this little experiment was a good idea. Is this whole like AI coding companion thing a good idea? Now, to answer that question, let's review how AI has come a long way. As I mentioned earlier, AI was very cutesy, and we could be asking it for stuff like, hey, give me the synonym for this word, or like, draw me a cool picture of a capybara, or can you, I used it for even like KubeCon submissions, when the abstract is like too long by like, mine are always too long by like 100 words. I'm like, can you like tighten this up a little bit so that it's, fits within those parameters, and then I'd like take some ideas from it, and so that was useful. But then MCP took it up a notch, because now it's opened it's opened up LLMs to like use the interwebs, which is awesome. And then agents came along, and then they gave us vibe coding, which was amazing, because all of a sudden, not only were we super duper productive, but now anybody could write code. Anybody, even my sister, who's like terrified of computers, can write code. And it means that a startup founder with a great idea, but who doesn't have a technical background, all of a sudden can develop a proof of concept like that, and they don't need that pesky tech person to like write the code. And this is going to be great. And certainly, AI has disrupted development. Gen Xers and millennials are coming up non-AI native, right? Because we have hand-coded everything. We are used to hand coding, so this is a major paradigm shift for us. We have gone from like, becoming masters of a language to like, oh, now how do we navigate this? Now we have to really not focus necessarily on language mastery, but being like really good architects. And meanwhile, we have our Gen Zs, who they're not like fully AI native. I'd say probably the Gen Alphas are probably the most AI native folks here, but they've probably spent fewer years hand coding compared to us Gen Xers and millennials. And so in some ways they have an upper hand, because the way that they're thinking is more AI native. But we have a bit of a gap, right? Because us elder developers, we have certain skills that our juniors lack. For example, we are great at troubleshooting. We've seen all sorts of things go wrong in our careers, and so our failures in a lot of ways are our best assets. And juniors are coming up in a world where there's almost like no failure, in the sense that you can just ask your LLM for advice, and it'll take care of it for you. So you're not going to see like your code absolutely imploding, because when it does, the LLM's going to be like, oh, I see a problem, let me fix it, let me run some tests, blah, blah, blah. And you just sit there and you're like, cool, that's awesome. So they're never going to experience that. So as seniors, it is our job to really mentor our juniors and give them a safe place to fail, and encourage them to like hand code some more stuff so they have that experience. And really, at the end of the day, all of us, no matter what, are shifting from builders to architects. And I think that's something that's extremely important to keep in mind. I think architecture was important before. It's even more important now. And not only that, but also being able to be an effective communicator. And that's something that's kind of interesting, because when you think about it, we use AI to write we can use AI to write our blog posts, or our LinkedIn posts. So it's taking, in some ways, it's taking our language away from us, and so we're not forced to be effective communicators, and yet we have to be effective communicators in order to write effective prompts for AI, so something to consider. So keeping all that in mind, let's look at what some good ideas are. So what's a good idea? Using reusable prompts to generate code, because LLMs are non-deterministic, prompts are non-deterministic. Let's use those prompts to create something deterministic, i.e. code. Having guardrails in place. As I mentioned, I ran my little Goose setup using a dev container, and that limits my blast radius, because then if it screws up my file system and my dev container, no problem. It's better than screwing up the file system in my broader host machine. I think it's a great idea to give boring tasks to AI. The other day I had to create a graph. I hate creating graphs, honestly. They taught us that in school, but boring. I don't need it for my job. I don't care. So I'm like, AI, create me this graph. I gave it some descriptions. We refined. Beautiful graph in the end. And developing architecture skills, always a good idea, always super important. What's a bad idea? Abdicating full control and knowledge to AI. As I mentioned earlier, we don't want to lose our writing skills. We don't want to we don't want AI to take the wheel. We still have to be in control, because the more we give up to AI, the less our brains are working. So it's almost like causing brain shrinkage. So let's keep exercising our brains. Coding in production, when you know a language well enough, it's fine to use AI to write a little side project in a language that you don't know. Fine, no problem. But as soon as we're talking about prod-ready code, you better damn well know that language, be able to explain the stuff that your AI agent created for you. Otherwise, you are running. First of all, the accountability is still on you, and you're running the risk of introducing some serious caca into prod, so we don't want that. And then we don't want to treat LLMs as deterministic, because unfortunately they're not. And we can't trust AI implicitly, because it lies, unfortunately. It has a lot of confidence, I'll give you that, but it lies. So at the end of the day, are the robots going to take over? Hopefully not. I don't think so. I believe in a Terminator-free world. But I will say this, sometimes it does feel like magic when we're dealing with LLMs. You ask for it to write you some code, and like, poof, there it is. I'm like, damn, this is freaking amazing, which is great. But at the end of the day, I think we still need to keep our wits about us and be the ones that are in control. I think at the end of the day, it's important for us to keep experimenting, going back to the original question, is this a good idea? Is this a problem looking for, is this a solution looking for a problem? Yeah, probably. This was probably like a silly little experiment, but I think silly little experiments are what really make tech amazing, for us to ask questions, experiment, try things out, get frustrated, cry like I did. I cried for a month. But without us pushing things forward, trying new things, talking about them in conferences, it sparks new ideas. I've been in so many conferences where I gave a talk on something, and then someone's like, I was inspired by your talk to talk about blah, 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 and dig into this topic deeper. And that's really what we're here for. So without pushing the boundaries, without innovating, without experimenting, we don't innovate. So with that, I will leave you with some references and shameless self-promotions. I do have a video course on observability with OpenTelemetry for anyone who's interested, who's more of a video person than a text person. Great companion to Casper's book. Also, I did mention I have a podcast, and the logo is a capybara, because love him. My daughter designed the logo. She has nothing to do with tech. She's going to be a nurse. And I've had some really cool guests on my podcast. Including Diana Todea, who's one of the organizers here. I've had Kelsey Hightower, Charity Majors, Abby Bankser, and most recently also Scott Hanselman. So do check it out. And finally, here is my contact info if you want to stay connected, and a link to the slides as well. And thank you so much. Appreciate it.